after more than 2 decades behind bars, after appeals denied, after headlines faded, after the world moved on, everything just changed. In a twist no one saw coming, shocking new evidence has reportedly surfaced. And insiders claim it doesn't just raise doubts, it destroys the entire case. For years, supporters insisted he was wrongfully convicted. For years, critics said the system had spoken. For years, the name CMurder carried a weight that split public opinion in half. But now, courtrooms are buzzing, legal analysts are scrambling, and sources close to the situation say a judge has reviewed information that fundamentally alters the narrative. What kind of evidence could do that? Was it hidden? Was it ignored? Or was it buried under pressure no one dared to challenge at the time? Because, according to insiders, this isn't just a technicality. It's not a minor procedural error. It's not a paperwork loophole. It's something bigger. Something that allegedly questions witness credibility, investigative methods, and even the timeline that secured the conviction in the first place. And here's what makes this even more explosive. The same voices that once called the case airtight are now going silent. If this release becomes official, if this evidence holds, it won't just free a man, it will shake faith in a verdict that stood for over 20 years. So what exactly was uncovered? Who found it? And why is it surfacing now? Because if what's being whispered is true, this isn't just a release story, it's a reckoning. To understand why this moment feels like an earthquake, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to the name, the rise, the power, and the shadow that followed it. Before the courtrooms, before the headlines, before the prison bars, there was CMurder, born Corey Miller, a central figure in the explosive rise of Southern hip-hop during the late 1990s. As part of No Limit Records, the empire founded by his brother Master P, CMurder was everywhere. Platinum plaques, national tours, magazine covers. His 1998 album Life or Death debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200. The South wasn't just rising, it was dominating. But fame at that level doesn't come quietly, and neither did the controversy. In January 2002, everything changed. A 16-year-old named Steve Thomas was shot and killed inside a nightclub in Harvey, Louisiana. Chaos, confusion, witnesses, panic. Within days, investigators zeroed in on CMurder as the primary suspect. The narrative formed fast. A rap star, a crowded club, a fatal shooting. The case immediately drew national media attention. Headlines were brutal. Talk shows dissected it. Comment sections ignited. And in a climate where hip-hop artists were often scrutinized through a different lens, the story felt bigger than just a criminal trial. Supporters insisted from the start that the case was flawed. They pointed to conflicting witness accounts. They questioned the reliability of statements. They claimed pressure was mounting on local authorities to secure a conviction quickly. In 2003, he was convicted of second-degree murder. But that wasn't the end. The conviction was overturned in 2006 due to jury misconduct. A retrial was ordered. For supporters, that moment felt like vindication. For critics, it was procedural noise. In 2009, after the retrial, Nehi was convicted again and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Life, no parole. For many, that word sealed the story shut, but for others, it only intensified the fight. Because over the years, something unusual kept happening. Witnesses began recanting. Multiple individuals who testified during the trials later signed affidavits claiming they were pressured or intimidated into identifying him as the shooter. Some alleged they were threatened with charges themselves. Others claimed they were coached. Those affidavits became the foundation of the Innocence campaign that slowly built momentum outside the courtroom. Social media changed everything. As the 2010s progressed, documentaries, podcasts, and independent investigators started re-examining old cases across the country. The public appetite for wrongful conviction stories grew. Names once forgotten were brought back into national conversation. And CMurder's case resurfaced. Legal advocates argued that exculpatory evidence may not have been properly presented. They questioned why certain witness statements that contradicted the prosecution's timeline weren't given equal weight. They asked why so many testimonies later shifted, but the legal system is slow. Appeals were filed, motions were denied. Hope rose and fell. Meanwhile, from prison, CMurder maintained his innocence. Letters were written. Interviews were conducted through phone calls. Family members, especially Master P, became vocal in interviews about what they described as a miscarriage of justice. The case became polarizing. Some believed the original verdicts reflected the evidence presented. Others saw it as a symbol of systemic failure, particularly in high-profile cases involving black artists. And then something shifted again. In recent years, broader criminal justice reform conversations began reshaping public discourse. High-profile exonerations gained national attention. District attorneys in various jurisdictions reopened cold cases under public pressure. Louisiana itself became part of that larger conversation. Advocacy groups started pushing harder. Independent investigators revisited transcripts. Forensic details were reanalyzed, and whispers began circulating that a new legal angle was being explored. Not just affidavits, not just recantations. Something stronger. Something that allegedly undermined the prosecution's original timeline. It's because if the timeline collapses, the entire structure of the case changes, and here's where it gets intense. According to sources close to the defense team, new material evidence surfaced that had not been fully examined during the earlier trials. Details remain tightly guarded, but insiders claim it challenges the central witness accounts that secured conviction. If true, that's seismic, because when a conviction hinges heavily on eyewitness testimony, and that testimony fractures, doubt multiplies. Meanwhile, public pressure intensified. Online petitions gained traction. Hashtags trended periodically. Influential voices began revisiting the case with renewed urgency. Even those who weren't fans of his music began asking, what if this was wrong? And when doubt enters a decades-old case, it doesn't fade quietly, it builds. Which brings us to now. Because the reason this story is exploding today isn't just because new evidence exists. It's because a judge has reportedly acknowledged it. Acknowledgement changes everything. It shifts the conversation from internet speculation to courtroom legitimacy. And if that acknowledgement leads to release, temporary or permanent, it won't just reopen debate, it will ignite it. But here's the question hanging in the air. What exactly does this new evidence prove? Does it directly identify another suspect? Does it dismantle the state's narrative? Or does it expose investigative misconduct? Because depending on which of those is true, this isn't just a story about one man walking free. It's a story about a system being forced to answer uncomfortable questions. And if what insiders are hinting at is accurate, the next development won't just shock fans, it will shock the courtroom itself. The courtroom was supposed to be routine that morning. No cameras allowed inside, no dramatic press conference scheduled, no viral announcement expected. Just another procedural hearing in a case many believed was long settled. But according to multiple legal observers present that day, the energy in the room shifted the moment the defense began speaking. Because this time, it wasn't just about recantations. It wasn't just about witness credibility. It was about evidence that allegedly never received full forensic scrutiny. And when the defense attorney reportedly used the words materially exculpatory, heads turned. That phrase carries weight. It doesn't suggest technical error, it suggests innocence. Sources claim the defense introduced newly analyzed forensic details that challenged the prosecution's original theory of how the shooting unfolded inside the nightclub. Specifically, timing. Because the original conviction relied heavily on eyewitness accounts placing CMurder at a precise location during the moment of the shooting. But what if that timeline doesn't hold? According to insiders close to the review process, a fresh examination of ballistic positioning and crowd movement data allegedly indicates inconsistencies between testimony and physical layout. If that's accurate, it raises a devastating question. Did the physical evidence ever truly match the narrative presented to jurors? And here's where the tension exploded. During the hearing, the prosecution reportedly argued that prior appeals had already addressed similar concerns. They maintained that the convictions were legally sound and that the new claims were cumulative, not transformative. But the defense countered with something new. An affidavit from an expert witness who allegedly states that certain ballistic interpretations presented in earlier trials were either incomplete or misleading. Incomplete. Misleading. Those words echoed differently in a life without parole case. And then came the first twist. A former witness, one who originally testified against him, reportedly reaffirmed under oath that prior identification statements were made under pressure. Not rumor, not internet speculation, under oath. Legal analysts watching from outside the courtroom immediately recognized the significance. Because when recantations happen years later, courts are often skeptical. But when those recantations align with new forensic challenges, that's when doubt becomes structural. Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered quietly at first. By midday, the crowd grew. Family members were present. Advocacy groups held signs. Social media live streams began circulating updates in real time. The hashtag #FreeCMurder began trending again. But this time, the tone felt different. Less hopeful. More urgent. And then, the moment that stunned observers. The presiding judge reportedly stated that the newly submitted material warrants serious review. Warrants serious review. That phrase may sound cautious, but in legal language, it signals momentum. Because courts are not obligated to entertain repetitive arguments. If something warrants review, it implies novelty. It implies weight. But here's where it gets even more intense. According to legal insiders, the defense is also questioning whether key exculpatory witness statements were properly disclosed during earlier proceedings. If evidence favorable to the defense was not fully presented or disclosed, that moves the issue beyond simple appeal. It enters constitutional territory, which means the stakes aren't just about one verdict. They're about procedural integrity. The prosecution, meanwhile, remains firm. Public statements emphasize confidence in the conviction. They assert that previous juries weighed the evidence thoroughly and reached lawful conclusions. But behind closed doors, sources suggest emergency strategy discussions began the moment the hearing adjourned. Because if the court grants a full evidentiary hearing, the original case may face comprehensive re-examination, and that possibility shifts the entire narrative. Supporters argue that multiple witness recantations over the years already cast significant doubt. Critics argue that recantations are common in high-profile cases and don't automatically invalidate verdicts. But when recantations intersect with forensic reinterpretation, the equation changes. And here's the emotional center of it all. For over 2 decades, CMurder has maintained his innocence from prison. Letters to fans, statements through family, public insistence that he did not commit the crime. Those words once sounded like protest. Now they sound like a challenge. Because if this new evidence holds, the question transforms from is he guilty to was he wrongfully convicted? And that's a seismic shift. But the twist doesn't end there. Late this afternoon, an additional motion reportedly surfaced, questioning the reliability of certain eyewitness identifications made under chaotic nightclub conditions. Legal experts know that cross-racial identification issues in high-stress environments can significantly affect memory reliability. If the defense demonstrates that jurors were not fully informed about those limitations, it strengthens the argument for relief, and now the entire country is watching again. National outlets are revisiting archived footage. Legal analysts are dissecting transcripts. Podcasts are re-releasing old episodes with new commentary layered in. The conversation is louder than it has been in years. But here's the cliffhanger that makes everything feel immediate. Sources close to the defense say the court may issue a preliminary decision on whether to grant expanded review sooner than expected. Sooner, not months. sooner. If that decision leans in favor of reconsideration, temporary release pending review becomes a possibility, and that possibility is what has supporters holding their breath tonight. Because if the court acknowledges that the foundation of the conviction is unstable, the unthinkable becomes real: release. But if the court rejects the motion, the momentum stalls, hope fractures, and the fight continues in uncertainty. For now, the case stands at a crossroads it hasn't reached in over a decade. New evidence, renewed scrutiny, a judge openly signaling review. The next ruling won't just determine legal procedure, it will determine whether this becomes one of the most shocking reversals in modern hip-hop history, and if what insiders are hinting at surfaces publicly in the coming days. The escalation may move beyond a courtroom and into national reckoning. The escalation didn't happen in the courtroom, it happened overnight. Because while most people were still trying to understand what warrants serious review really meant, legal analysts, independent investigators, and media outlets were digging, and what they found sent shockwaves far beyond Louisiana. Early the next morning, a respected legal commentator went live with a breakdown of trial transcripts from the original conviction. What stood out? Inconsistencies. Small ones at first. A timeline shift here. And a witness statement adjustment there. But when those inconsistencies were placed side by side with the newly introduced forensic concerns, the pattern started to look bigger. And then came the reveal that truly ignited the national conversation. An investigative journalist published an article suggesting that one of the key eyewitnesses who testified during the retrial had privately expressed doubt years earlier. But that statement allegedly never made it in front of the jury in full context. If true, that's explosive. Because jurors base verdicts on what they're shown, not what's omitted. And when the word omitted enters a wrongful conviction discussion, the ground shifts. Within hours, legal reform advocates began amplifying the claim. Podcasts that focus on exoneration cases started revisiting archived interviews. Not social media threads comparing original trial testimony with later affidavits gained millions of views. The case was no longer just about CMurder. It became a symbol, a flashpoint in the larger debate about eyewitness reliability, prosecutorial conduct, and the difficulty of undoing decades-old convictions. And then, the moment that truly changed the energy. A retired legal professional who had previously worked within the Louisiana court system gave an interview stating, "If the new forensic analysis contradicts the state's timeline in a material way, that's not minor, that's foundational." Foundational. That word echoed everywhere, because if the foundation cracks, everything above it becomes unstable. But here's where it gets even more dramatic. Late that afternoon, a source close to the review process hinted that the judge had requested additional documentation related to evidence handling procedures from the original investigation. Evidence handling, chain of custody, documentation gaps. Those phrases are rarely mentioned casually. And when they are, it means something serious is being examined. Meanwhile, supporters gathered outside the courthouse again. This time larger, louder, more emotionally charged. Family members spoke to reporters. Advocacy leaders described the moment as closer than ever. The energy wasn't just hopeful, it was tense. Because hope at this stage is dangerous. And then came the headline that froze everyone. A local news outlet reported that the court had scheduled an emergency follow-up hearing. Emergency. That word doesn't get used lightly in long-settled cases. It suggested urgency. It suggested that the newly presented material wasn't being brushed aside. Inside legal circles, analysts began openly discussing the possibility of interim relief, meaning temporary release while further review is conducted. That scenario alone would mark a historic shift. But the shocking reveal wasn't just procedural, it was personal. Because through a spokesperson, CMurder issued a brief statement from prison. "I've waited 22 years for the truth to speak louder than noise." That line went viral instantly. Not because it was dramatic, but because of the timing, truth, noise. For 2 decades, public opinion filled the silence. Now, legal review might be giving that truth space. The prosecution, however, responded swiftly. An unofficial statement emphasized confidence in the integrity of prior convictions and cautioned against mischaracterizing procedural review as exoneration. Careful wording, calculated tone. But even that statement acknowledged something important. Procedural review was happening, and here's where the narrative escalated nationally. Major outlets began comparing this case to other high-profile exonerations, where decades passed before new evidence altered outcomes. Wrongful conviction organizations issued reminders that recantations combined with forensic reanalysis have historically led to overturned verdicts. The momentum felt different now. Not fringe, not speculative, legitimate. And then, the most unexpected development of all. A respected legal scholar published an opinion piece arguing that if the court determines prior juries were not presented with complete or accurate evidence context, a new trial would be legally justified. Not guaranteed, but justified. That word hit like lightning, because a new trial means everything resets, and reset means possibility. The emotional tension reached a peak that evening when Master P addressed the situation publicly. He didn't shout. He didn't attack the system. He simply said, "We believe the truth is finally being heard." That calm confidence resonated deeply. But here's the cliffhanger that keeps everyone on edge. Insiders now suggest that the court's preliminary decision may come faster than expected, potentially within days, not weeks. And if that decision grants expanded evidentiary review or interim release, it will mark the most significant development in the case since the 2009 conviction. The country is watching again. The legal community is divided. Supporters are hopeful. Critics remain cautious. And the question hovering over everything is simple, but massive. Will this be remembered as the moment the justice system corrected itself? Or the moment it doubled down? Because whatever the judge decides next won't just impact one man. It will impact how the system is perceived for years to come. And if the next ruling breaks in favor of release, the reaction won't be quiet. It will be explosive. The moment the word emergency hearing hit social media, everything exploded. Not just in hip-hop circles, not just among longtime supporters across the entire country. Because when a case that has stood for over 2 decades suddenly shows cracks, people don't react quietly. They react emotionally. Hashtag CMurder, hashtag justice review, hashtag wrongful conviction, hashtag 22 years later. All trending within hours? And the reactions weren't one-sided. Supporters flooded timelines with old interviews, highlighting years of maintained innocence. Clips of prison phone calls resurfaced. Fans reposted lyrics that now felt prophetic. Advocacy groups amplified the forensic developments and witness recantations as proof that the system isn't infallible. But critics pushed back hard. Legal commentators on cable news reminded viewers that review does not equal exoneration. They emphasized the importance of respecting jury verdicts. Some framed the surge of support as emotional rather than evidentiary. The country split into 2 narratives. A narrative 1. A man wrongfully imprisoned for over 20 years is finally getting justice. Narrative 2. A convicted individual is benefiting from public pressure and celebrity influence. And the tension between those narratives only intensified when high-profile voices stepped in. Rappers, producers, and entertainers began posting supportive messages. Some called the case a symbol of systemic flaws. Others urged caution but acknowledged that new evidence deserved full examination. Meanwhile, legal reform advocates used the moment to spotlight broader issues: eyewitness misidentification, prosecutorial disclosure obligations, forensic misinterpretation. The conversation grew larger than one case. It became about trust. Can decades-old verdicts be wrong? How often does new evidence change outcomes? What happens when recantations collide with forensic review? Talk shows turned it into debate segments. Podcast hosts dedicated full episodes. Even people who had never followed the case began asking questions. And then came the reaction that changed the tone again. A retired prosecutor publicly stated, "If material evidence was not fully contextualized for jurors, that deserves correction, regardless of public opinion." That comment shifted the energy, because it wasn't coming from an activist. It was coming from someone within the system. At the same time, family members of the victim released a brief, emotionally heavy statement urging the public to remember the life that was lost. That reminder grounded the entire conversation, because amid legal strategy and media frenzy, a tragic death remains at the center of this case. And that's what makes the public reaction so intense. It's not just celebrity, it's not just fame, it's justice versus certainty. Supporters organized peaceful rallies calling for transparency in the review process. Critics demanded patience and respect for court procedure. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds. And then something surprising happened. National legal organizations issued neutral but firm statements, emphasizing that courts reviewing new evidence is not weakness, it's strength. That perspective reframed the moment entirely. Instead of seeing review as instability, some began viewing it as proof the system can self-correct, but others weren't convinced. Online skeptics questioned the timing of renewed attention. They asked why the evidence wasn't resolved years ago. They expressed concern about influence, and yet, through all the debate, one fact remained unchanged. The court is actively reviewing new material. That alone has shifted public perception more than any hashtag could. Streaming platforms saw renewed interest in CMurder's music catalog. Documentaries about wrongful convictions experienced viewership spikes. Legal analysis channels gained subscribers overnight. The case became cultural again, not nostalgic, immediate. And then, late tonight, a courthouse source hinted that a decision timeline may be clearer by the end of the week. That hint sent social media into overdrive once more, because now it feels close. Closer than it has ever been. But here's the reality that keeps tension high. Public support cannot decide legal outcomes. Judges rule on evidence, not emotion. And as passionate as the country may be right now, everything hinges on what the court determines about that new forensic review and witness credibility. Will it justify expanded evidentiary proceedings? Will it justify interim relief? Or will it be deemed insufficient? The public reaction is powerful, but the gavel is stronger. And as we move toward what could be the most pivotal ruling in the case's history, one final development is quietly unfolding behind the scenes. A development that could either seal the release or delay it indefinitely. Because according to insiders, there's one more piece of information the court is evaluating, and if it surfaces publicly, it could change everything again, just when it seemed like the momentum couldn't intensify any further. A sealed document changed everything. Late last night, multiple legal reporters confirmed that the court requested a supplemental submission from the defense. Something that had not yet been discussed publicly. Not another affidavit. Not another recantation. Something else. And according to two independent sources familiar with the filing, this supplemental material allegedly addresses chain of custody inconsistencies related to physical evidence from the original investigation. Chain of custody. Those three words carry enormous weight. Because in criminal cases, especially ones hinging on physical or ballistic interpretation, documented evidence handling must be airtight. Every transfer, every storage location, every timestamp. If gaps exist, even small ones, reasonable doubt expands dramatically. Now, here's where it gets explosive. One insider claims that during internal review, discrepancies were identified between the documented timeline of evidence collection and the presentation timeline described during trial testimony. Discrepancies, not confirmed errors, but inconsistencies significant enough for the court to request clarification. And when a judge asks for clarification in a decades-old case, that's not routine. That's serious. But here's the twist no one was prepared for. Sources now suggest the court is evaluating whether these alleged inconsistencies intersect with the new forensic reinterpretation. If the physical evidence timeline doesn't align with the witness timeline, the original narrative becomes unstable from two angles at once. And that's where the cliffhanger deepens. Because while supporters are hopeful, legal experts remain cautious, and a former appellate judge speaking anonymously stated, "Even strong new evidence must meet a high procedural threshold. Courts do not overturn life sentences lightly." That reminder hit like cold water. Momentum feels powerful, but legal standards are rigid. And then, just hours ago, something even more unexpected surfaced. A previously quiet witness from the original case reportedly reached out to defense counsel, requesting to revise portions of earlier testimony. No details released yet. No confirmation of what the revision involves. But if another testimonial shift aligns with forensic review and evidence handling questions, the cumulative effect could be overwhelming. At the same time, prosecutors are preparing their counterarguments. Sources indicate they are emphasizing finality, prior jury determinations, and procedural barriers to reopening cases fully. Finality versus fairness. That's the tension now, and it's enormous because if the court grants expanded evidentiary review, it signals that the case may enter a new phase entirely, one that could include hearings where experts testify again, witnesses are re-examined, and evidence is reinterpreted under modern scrutiny. If that happens, release, temporary or otherwise, becomes increasingly plausible. But if the court denies further review, the door narrows significantly. Hope stalls, and appeals shift back into slower channels. Right now, everything balances on the judge's interpretation of one critical question. Does the newly presented material undermine confidence in the verdict? That's the legal standard, not sympathy, not public pressure, confidence in the verdict. And that's why the next ruling matters more than any headline. Because if confidence is shaken, the consequences ripple far beyond this case. It would signal that even decades-old convictions can be revisited when substantial new information emerges. But if confidence remains intact, the case remains where it has stood for years, unchanged. Tonight, supporters are waiting, family members are silent, legal teams are on edge, and the courthouse remains quiet, and which somehow feels louder than anything else. Because within days, possibly sooner, a decision will be issued, and that decision will determine whether this story becomes a historic exoneration or another chapter in a long, unfinished fight. Either way, one thing is undeniable: this case is no longer buried in the past. It's alive again. And the next update could alter everything. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe the new evidence is strong enough to shake a 20-year conviction? Should courts reopen long-settled cases when forensic reinterpretation and witness changes align? Or do you think verdicts must stand once juries decide? Drop your thoughts in the comments, respectfully. This conversation isn't just about one name. It's about how justice evolves. If you've been following this case for years, tell me how you're feeling right now. Hopeful, skeptical, cautiously waiting? And make sure you subscribe, because the moment the court issues its decision, we're breaking it down immediately. No speculation, no exaggeration. Just facts as they unfold. Because whatever happens next, it won't just impact one man. It will impact how we view justice, evidence, and the power of review. Stay tuned. The ruling is coming.